A lot of times is not knowing what you don't know is the biggest opportunity. This is the hard part of my job is I have to tell them in a nice way that the bottleneck of the business is themselves.
If you can learn to fail without just completely imploding, you know what I mean? And what I mean by that is all of a sudden you fail and you have $500,000 in debt. You can't do that because now how do you build yourself back out, right? But if you fail and you have $5,000 in debt and you're 30 years old, you can definitely manage that.
We take care of the soul of the company and we take care of the system part of the company as well.
You can't run a business with friends. It has to be a business.
And that's a fallacy. People think that your business has to be perfect. It doesn't. It's okay if the salt and pepper fall down one day.
You need constant engagement, and meetings are a part of that keeps employees engaged. I ask people, and that doesn't have to be a financial answer, but if you could go back and give your younger self advice, what would it be? Welcome to today's PlanAssist Podcast, where we interview successful business owners and leaders with the goal of helping people who listen to the podcast make better financial decisions. PlanAssist, it's not an investment. It's a process on how to make better financial decisions built around first principles of liquidity, safety, and growth. And what we really try to do is help you build that through answering yes to three questions. Is your lifestyle aligned with your income? Is your income resilient and diversified? And then are you making progress on both? And whether you're a small business person or whether you're doing this for the business, for the company, or for your individual, those are still critical questions that you need to be able to answer with confidence. And really, that's what PlanAssist's goal is and mission is, to help people answer yes to that. So today we are super excited to welcome Manny De La Vega. He's the founder of Ripple Leadership Coaching. Manny brings a unique perspective as an electrical and computer engineer who spent more than 20 years building and operating businesses. And those of you who know engineers, one of the things they do really well is process. And so as a coach and a business coach, it's really important that we all do that. And I'm sure he brings huge knowledge and experience from doing that. He's co-founder of and scaled multiple hospitality businesses, worked in technology and as a sales leader, and helps business owners grow. So with that, Manny, is there anything you want to add to that? Did I miss anything?
No. That's great, Tim. And as you say, as engineers, we're all about process and procedures. But we understand that those processes and procedures only work as good as the team works. And maybe that's one of the things that engineers get too caught up in the systematic approach of things. But we forget about people make those systems work. So we have to take that into account as well. So that's what we do at Ripple. We take care of the soul of the company and we take care of the system part of the company as well.
And that's such an important point to touch on before we get into the conversation. Is processes are incredibly important. And I am one of those who really believe in them, but you still got to overlap them with people. And as much as a business, every business you ever see that's successful, it's really the art of combining those two, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we walk into businesses that are efficient to the max, but they're soulless. They have high turnover because everything works like a clock, but nobody's excited about anything. So, and then we walk into the other that everybody's excited about the business, about the mission, and about the good they will do to the world, but they have no system. So everything falls apart. And eventually that excitement runs out, and then you need to bring some systems to sustain it. So we are always trying to balance those two, make sure you don't go too much in one direction, too much in the other. And there is a sweet spot where you have great systems and a great culture that support those systems. And that's what businesses thrive.
And you have to work at it. Just even though you get that sweet spot, that doesn't stay. You got to constantly be working at, as the leader of that business, how do you kind of bring it back? Because it'll move, right? And then you got to bring it back to the center. And that's the art. I mean, that's what makes a great business versus a good business.
Absolutely. There is a book which I think is called Loving Hospitality, where it talks about having the salt and the pepper in the middle of the table, right? And as you serve customers, you're always moving that salt and the pepper. And sometimes they're in the center, and sometimes they go to the side, almost fall off, but you always have to bring it back to the center. That's what it means to have that balance, always having the system and the soul. They're always going to move around because businesses grow, economies tank. There's a lot of things that affect the business, but you always try to keep that salt and pepper in the middle as much as you can. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to stay there. And that's a fallacy. People think that your business has to be perfect. It doesn't. It's okay if the salt and pepper fall down one day, you know? You'll pick it up and you bring it back and then you fix your business again and then you keep moving.
That's such a great analogy, and you just put it back in the center. Okay, so before we get in too far into this, I always start all these podcasts off with the same question. So I ask people, and that doesn't have to be a financial answer, but if you could go back and give your younger self advice, what would it be?
Well, it does have to do a little bit with finances,
Oh, yeah, it's
but
fine.
I would tell myself not to be afraid to take calculated risks. And the word calculated is the key, right? Because I took a bunch of risks that were not calculated at all, and they got me into a bunch of trouble. But the calculated risk that I always took by always analyzing, having systems in place and all that, they always turns out, even if the beginning seems like it's very tough, and if things seem like they're not gonna work out, if you keep at it and have resilience, eventually they will work out. So a lot of times I was afraid of that, and I would tell my younger self, go ahead and do it because it'll work out at the end.
I think to kind of build on that, when I was younger, and I also see this in a lot of 30 and 40-year-olds, I was really fearful of failure. But if you can fail successfully, and what I mean by that is, to your point of calculated risk, if you can learn to fail without just completely imploding, you know what I mean? And what I mean by that is all of a sudden you fail and you have a $500,000 in debt. You can't do that because now how do you build yourself back out, right? But if you fail and you have $5,000 in debt and you're 30 years old, you can definitely manage that.
Absolutely. And that's what the word calculator really means.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
are you able to recover even if things go really wrong? Because if the answer is no, there's no way I can recover from this, then you shouldn't take it anyway. So absolutely.
And that I think that's the perfect way to think about it. It's like one of my favorite quotes from Charlie Munger was I was watching a Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting, and someone asked Munger what the best advice he ever got, or financial lesson, I think is the way that he worded it. And with no pause, he said, I'd invert everything. That was the best lesson he got. And what he meant by that was he went on to tell the story, which I'll do super briefly, but it's he was in the army and he was in charge of the weather for the pilots. And he found that if he was giving pilots blue skies, low winds, 5 mile visibility, that didn't help him much. But if he inverted it and said, there's ice, there's winds, there's a low thundercloud, that was incredibly powerful to the clients or to the pilots. And he said, that's what I learned and I took that into my real estate career and ultimately Berkshire Hathaway, where he said, I wanted to look at, okay, what could happen? But I also wanted to look at, okay, what happens if we go the other way? And he just balanced those two. It's fascinating when you think about it like that.
Absolutely. And to build on that analogy, a lot of times business owners are very emotional because they have missions. They're driven by mission, they're driven by servicing. So let's say you look at the weather and you're like, oh, it looks beautiful out there, right? I'm going to take this risk and I'm going to fly this airplane because everything looks beautiful. But then you forget to go back and take a look at the data. What's the weather going to be like historically, what it's been like?
That's right.
What's the radar telling you? Because that's when
Yes.
we get in trouble. Sometimes our feelings tells us it's a calculated risk, but when you look at the data, in this case financials, that's where you can move yourself away from the emotion and actually be certain that that's a calculated risk. And a lot of times we forget to actually look at the facts, most importantly financials. So that's
I
that's
am
what I have to
shocked,
start to do.
Manny. I am blown away by how many small business owners I sit down with that have almost no idea how to read a balance sheet or and an income statement. I mean, they know in general, right? But it is really frightening that they kind of make decisions based on their feelings, and they get way too. And then I'm curious. Kind of, I want to hit on this emotion piece though. They're way too connected to the people that work for them, like almost like to 100%, right? Because you can't run a business with friends. It has to be a business.
Absolutely. I mean, people tend to do that, but again, you have to have a fine line into friendships. You know, a lot of this family, it's even worse when you work with family. And we work with a lot of business owners that their brother, their sister, the father, sometimes even the mom is involved with that. And that's worse than friendships because with friendships, you can stop being friends and then you can go different ways. But family, you have to stay as a family. So we always teach these type of businesses to have those lines. You know, there's usually a ownership relationship they have. Then it comes the operational. Okay, who's in charge? Who's the CEO? Who's the COO? And then the last one is who's the brother and the sister and the father. And you have to be very clear on how to treat each other or each of these lines. And most importantly, do not cross them, right? Because then we're having a CEO discussion in the middle of a birthday party or vice versa. We're having personal family issues discussed within a bunch of employees. So you gotta be really clear about those lines that you cannot cross, and that's how the business stays healthy, you know.
And then how do you help businesses do that? Because it's got to be both people, right? So for instance, if I'm working for my brother and I'm the salesperson and he's the CEO, he can keep the line, but if I don't keep the line, then I also mess it up, right? So it's got to be communicated all the way across the process, right? How do you do that?
Well, 80% is awareness because a lot of times you're going to business with your family and you've been having a dynamic with your family member your whole life. And you think that having the business, you don't stop and think, is this type of relationship is going to work in my business? They never do that. They just go into business, get excited, and yeah, we're partners. But you gotta bring, that's why as coaches it's very useful to bring an outside perspective. This is how your relationship has been. And there's some good parts of it, but there's some toxic parts of that. And you cannot bring those to the business. And most importantly, we teach them how to heal those and how to stop those from happening. It takes work and it takes creating new habits. So it's not that easy. But awareness gets a lot of the job done, which most of them don't even have awareness of how their relationship is in the first place. So,
And then how about like when I ran a team in corporate America? So I spent some time at Schwab, at Ameriprise, at H&R Block. And one of the things that I was taught really early on is overshare, right? If someone was in my group, I was really conscious about making sure that they realized what I was making decisions on. So I didn't just say, okay, we're doing something or go through a process. I shared numbers, right? And I was constantly telling them, you know, as an employee of this organization have to meet these numbers and you have to help me meet these numbers. And it's not like I'm getting fired and you're not. We're all getting fired.
uh-huh. Yeah. And oversharing has translated into having a better communication strategy because
Oh, true.
now with communication, it's all over the board, right? I mean, even social media, like which social media do you pay attention to nowadays? There's so many of them. Same in businesses is like who is driving the communication, top, bottom, who owns it? It's very confusing. What channels do you use? So what we always help them is create a communication strategy, which would usually translate in what we call one-page roadmap. And in that roadmap, we put all the most important parts of the business, which is the mission, the vision, the values, the goals. You have all those pieces of information, and then we have owners kind of share that with everyone. And it keeps it very simple, very concise, and avoids that, oversharing is better than not sharing at all. But how do you take that oversharing and make it more efficient so you spend less time and get more impact and more results from your employees. So that's what it has translated to nowadays.
Do you include numbers in that one pager?
Absolutely. We have the 1 year numbers, 3 year numbers, and quarterly numbers. They
Oh,
have to
so
be there. Now, you cannot drive or move forward if you don't know, if you're not measuring where you're at and where you need to be at. Absolutely.
yeah, so that's a great idea. Have like a one-page roadmap that everyone can't come back 3 months later and say, I really didn't know. No, I've
Exactly.
shared that in every meeting for the last 3 years. And then how often do you have these small businesses meet with kind of an all-employee meeting, a leadership meeting? That's another thing. People that didn't grow up in corporate America, they're not very disciplined in their meetings.
Yeah. When we're trying to fix the business and we first come in, we do intensive in the first 90 minutes. 3 or 4 long meetings that we get all these done. But once it's done, then we have a cadence of about once a quarter. Once a quarter, we find that that's the right cadence where you can analyze what happened and you still have time to deter or move the target if you need to, if conditions have changed. Kind of like the airplane analogy, right? You don't want to go too long into the trip to know that you're way farther away from where you're actually going. So, and then we do an annual meeting just to kind of fine tune and realign before the next year. So that's how
And
you show
and
up.
then do you help like a lot of these small businesses where they're not used to doing these meetings? So you actually help them run the first few meetings and then you can step out. Is that what you do? Then you become less
Absolutely.
and less visible.
Absolutely. Some of them don't even know the concept of meetings, or they have boring meetings, ineffective meetings all the time, and they don't know what an efficient meeting is all about. We usually don't go longer than an hour. And
Okay.
we have a system, talk about systems. We have a system for these kind of meetings. We call them the weekly sync meetings, where if you do these things consistently every week with your team, then the quarterlies become easier and the annuals become way easier. Because a lot of times they don't have those habits and they don't do these weekly or quarterlies, then the end of a year meeting, it's a mess. You have a lot of things to fix and a lot of things to do, and it's overwhelming for everybody. So you gotta build a habit in a weekly basis and then in a quarterly basis. So we teach them how to do that. And yeah, you're right. Sometimes we have to run them because they've never seen them before and they don't know what it's like to have an efficient meeting. So we run a couple times and when they turn them over to the right person also, there has to be the right facilitator for the meeting because some facilitators will let things go, and it won't keep the meeting on track. So you need a person that is able to keep the meeting on track so it's sufficient.
And what people will argue is, and I've had these conversations with small businesses, so I'm curious what you think about this, is they'll say, well, we don't need to meet weekly. There's not enough information. And I'll come back to them and say, what you don't understand is think of a meeting as an opportunity to let off some emotional steam, right? And so all of your employees have they're all in different places, they're all emotional at different levels, et cetera. If you're not having regular meetings, those employees will build those emotional positive and negative, right? Over time. And then when you have this meeting, it'll have this, that didn't go very well. Well, it's not the meeting itself. It's just you went too long.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, a lot of business owners make this mistake. They have the meetings to share information. And that's not what a meeting is about. You create a scoreboard, a dashboard where that information gets shared during the week. So by the time you show up to the weekly meeting, everybody knows what happened during the week. Because if you spend the meeting just trying to update everybody what you did last week, it's so inefficient, right? And that's when it gets really boring and it gets really long. So you gotta have these systems. You put your numbers, you put your notes, and they all feed into the same system. And then when you show up to the meeting, you have all that information, and the meeting becomes a discussion and decision-making meeting. That's it. And it makes it very dynamic and it makes it very efficient. And then you're right. You gotta have an environment where you can share how you feel, frustrations or wins so
That's
so
right.
you'll get recharged or you get the resources that you need. A lot of times in these meetings, just by sharing how they feel, I feel frustrated. I was supposed to have these deadline, I didn't. And then once they start sharing why, then all of their resources come. Oh, I can help with that. I can help you get that done. And then all of a sudden, the big problem that you thought you had, it gets resolved sometimes at the same meeting, you
And it's
know?
nothing. It's what you and I, we live in this world, but small to mid-sized businesses don't grasp. You need constant engagement, and meetings are a part of that that keeps employees engaged. Even if you don't think it does, it absolutely does, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But you gotta have the right meetings
That's
because
right.
everybody's really burned out about just showing up to mindless meetings or be present in a meeting where you don't even have to be there and you just listen every week after week, every when you have no input, you have
Then
no
you do the
decision.
negative. Then it turns into an
Then
actual the other side of it. So when I was
exactly.
at Schwab, one of the most interesting, we had this period. I'd be curious to know if Schwab still does this, but this was 20 years ago. So I had a branch, and I don't remember how many people. I must have had somewhere in seven, eight people. Maybe there was 10 of us, but some number like that. And
Mhm.
some leadership coach like you was helping us kind of get more efficient, et cetera. And one of the things that they had us do as branch managers was a short 5 minute stand up meeting every morning. And it was required. And when they first told us that as branch managers, we were all whining and back and forth. This is ridiculous and da 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 da, right? But it was so interesting, Manny, because once all of us did it for a month or two, those meetings got extremely productive, and they were 5 minute stand up meetings. They were clear about this. No one can be sitting down. You stand up. What's the three or four things we're focusing on today? Here's something happening, and then we would break. And employees got to a point where when we first started it, they were all whining and blah blah blah. But they made it a corporate requirement, right? So it wasn't like we could pick and choose whether we wanted to do it or not. That's the nice thing about corporations where they get a kind of drive change. But after about 30 days, it just became natural. And it was so fascinating how it worked. I was really surprised.
Yeah, I mean, when you give again, a forum for people to share, and they don't want to share at first, but if you make them feel safe that this
Yes.
is the time, this is where you can say it, eventually they start sharing, and then it becomes really interesting. Yeah,
Okay.
it happens a lot in hospitality because in hospitality, we don't have time to meet. We run 16 hours a day and you gotta serve customers and you're busy, very busy before you open and very busy once you open your doors. And so those ad hoc meetings are always essential to have and work great, like you said. Yeah,
But in great restaurants, okay, so this is the difference between terrible restaurants, good restaurants, and great restaurants. If you go into a great restaurant and you talk to the waiter, he or she will always know what's on the menu, et cetera. And that came from a 5 minute meeting from the chef saying, here's
absolutely.
what it is, right? And people don't
Absolutely.
realize that. That's
Yep.
what an equivalent of a 5 minute meeting. They'll say, here's what's hot, here's the best for today, da 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 da.
That's exactly how it happens. Yeah. If they don't know, that means they missed the meeting or they don't have the meetings at all.
That's awesome. Okay, let's shift gears, kind of get a little bit bigger picture for a second. So as an executive coach, so remember for those of you listening, Manny, that's what he does. So he helps small, mid-sized, large-sized companies leadership really get more effective and efficient. So with that said, give us a kind of summary of kind of what are the biggest both opportunities and challenges. And you can kind of start with challenges and opportunities, but I'm just curious, kind of what are you seeing out there on those two fronts?
For in business in general, you mean?
In general, like when you sit down with, let's just use an analogy of a small business, a small to mid-sized business, right? They're doing a
Mhm.
couple mil a year or 2, 3 million
Yeah.
a year. What do you see as their biggest? Let's start with challenges and then we'll do opportunities.
Well, the biggest challenge is always that's what I'm in the leadership coaching is because even they may think they have the right team, a lot of times they end up not having the right team. And what I mean by that, they may have the right people, but they may not have the right people in the right seat. So it happens a lot that there is these businesses that are making money and they're like feel like it feels like a family, right? But they kind of just used to interacting with each other in one way, and they don't know that there is a better way by understanding what everybody's doing and what everybody could be doing better that they haven't thought about. So again, a lot of times is not knowing what you don't know is the biggest opportunity. Because if you're in your day to day leading the same business, I mean, we had a client that, I think it was like second generation, 80 years in business, and things were happening, but nobody thought, okay, these could be better. The market has changed, and we never stopped to think, what do we need to do differently? Because things have changed and the team has changed. So when we come in and bring that light to that, they go, oh, wow, I can't believe this is something we didn't think about, and there's something that is so easy to fix. And there's always so many opportunities in that different type of thinking, in that different, having a different perception. Now you can be more profitable. Now you can reduce costs. Now you can, provide better training. All these opportunities just pop up by having that different mindset.
And I think that's the one thing a small business doesn't get that those of us who grew up in Fortune 500 companies got is because there was always people, even if we didn't have access to someone like you. So when I go back to my days as a branch manager at Schwab, I didn't get access to you, but people like you were helping the company redirect and refocus. So, and then the last thing that I would say about what you just said or just add on to is, sometimes if you've been running a company, you like all these people, they become family. Well, if you have someone like you come in, making the change doesn't become them, it becomes Manny, right? So if they want to kind of get wound up with someone, they can kind of get wound up with you because you're going to go away at some point if you do your job.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what the systems are for. I mean, we don't make them depend on us. We're gonna make them depend on the systems and
Right.
their own people. They're not gonna go away. They're gonna stay or they're gonna grow with
Right.
them. There's always analogies of businesses and sports, right? And no player, basketball, football, whatever, would ever think about going into professional, you're playing professional without a coach. And that happens in business all the time. People go and open businesses with no coaching, no knowledge, nobody to tell them you're doing good. And business cannot be, it's too complex, especially nowadays where things change so rapidly, right? And everything, and marketing and operations. You need a coach that gives you a different perspective that is telling you, yes, I just watched a documentary of Rafael Nadal, which is a great tennis player. His uncle was his coach since he was 4 years old, and he never stopped, and he never operated, never play a game without his coach by himself. So why don't we do that in business? Why don't we put the same importance of a coach? Because that's what I have done. I mean, I realized I was too naive early on to do the same and going, and I can figure I can do it by myself. And then I got into a lot of trouble. Then I cannot do it by myself. I need some help. I need to bring help to my business. And that's when things started really happening for me.
That's a perfect analogy, but the challenge is ego. It's 100% ego, and I don't care who's listening to this. That is it becomes down to that because what happens is if we're running our business, we're used to everyone kind of being yes people, whether we realize it or not. And the thing a coach brings is challenging to us, and if that coach is telling us all the stuff we're doing good, we're not going to get better. And he or she sucks, right? I mean, like, seriously sucks. If you're not getting uncomfortable with that coach or that business leader, then you probably have the wrong coach.
Absolutely. And there is a belief out there that coaches don't want to take care of the smaller businesses because they think they cannot afford their services. And honestly, it's not that. It's that their ego is still there and they haven't failed enough that they can get to the point that now I need help because you can always find money to pay for the help that you need. That's what I did, right? Even when you're small. But if your ego is not allowing you to get constructive feedback or get the help that you need, you're not going to go anywhere. So sometimes we avoid the smaller businesses not because we don't want to help, it's because they're not ready to be helped. Unfortunately, they need to fail more to be able to get to the point that now they are able to accept the help, which is
But
unfortunate. because
But
a
that
lot of
applies
businesses.
to me too. I can't help someone that's not ready for help, right? I don't even
Absolutely.
try. I used to be this
Mhm.
salesperson. I'd say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to help you with this. Today, if they're not ready for help, they gotta be almost completely there. And if they're not, I don't even take them on. I mean, now I'm
Yeah,
real nice about saying, no, I'm not the right fit. Here's who you should go see, etc. But the number one reason has nothing to do with money. It's
yeah,
100%. If they're not mentally ready for the help, I'm not there.
absolutely. I'm there with you on that,
So
which
one of the
breaks my
things
heart
that
all the time because
so one of the things, and this goes to exactly what you're talking about. So when I started Core Wealth Consultants, I'd left Ameriprise. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I started Core Wealth. I've been helping people with investments for my whole life, but in different roles through the time. But the one thing that was really kind of surprising me after I've been doing this about 5 years was I said, I need to come up with some way that I can communicate with clients between meetings, right? Because I only have an hour a quarter, right? And in some cases, less than that, right? So a couple hours a year is about all I engage with them. Well, when I do engage with them, they usually have something on their minds and it's their meeting. So I'm always on that. So I don't really get to share some of the other things that I've learned or know. And so I decided I needed to come up with some principles and I'll kind of write a real short booklet for my clients, not for outside my client base, but I wanted to share something. And so I started looking for what were some common principles that successful people always did. And it was interesting, Manny, because when I did that, I found five or six kind of key things that they all did. And remember, I've spent my whole life helping rich people stay rich. Right? That's really been my job. So I know lots of rich and successful people, but I still
yeah,
couldn't find a common denominator. And then I did what we talked about earlier. I inverted. I said, well, what do people who aren't successful do? And immediately three things lined up. Successful people have a plan. Unsuccessful people don't. They just kind of wing it. Okay. Number two is successful people always are diversified. They diversify everything, not just investments. They diversify their income stream. They diversify their tax liability. They diversify their investments. They diversify about everything. If you look at them, they're like, wow. And then unsuccessful people don't do that. They all just go 100%. Here's what I'm going to do. And then if that comes apart, their whole lives blow up. And then the third thing that happens, which is the hardest of these three, is I call it seek counsel. Okay. But I get a lot of feedback. They're like, you shouldn't use seek counsel. That sounds biblical or something. I'm like, whatever. Call it whatever you want. Okay. But successful people are really good at asking people for input. And they don't even know they're good at it. It's fascinating because they do it they're almost like they're curious, right? And then unsuccessful people, their egos, their emotions, they just, oh, I can't talk to that person. He's mean to me. I'm just like, whatever. That's not how business is designed. It's fascinating. How much do you agree with that or disagree or whatever?
I totally relate with that. With no plan, you don't get very far. And again, you have to fail to realize what are they, and then you realize you didn't plan ahead, right? In my case, for example, when you talk about diversification, you're right, everything. Sometimes even your network. In my case, I got into hospitality and I started hanging out with hospitality people. But then at some point, I realized I'm not getting all 360 of what a business is like because they're too locked in into one industry. And then to be honest, a lot of the successful restaurant owners were not the people that I wanted to become, and there are definitely some really great restaurant owners, but some of them are not, they have broken families, a lot of drug addiction. I was like, I don't want to end up in that. So let me get out of so I stopped hanging out with hospitality people and started doing other businesses. And I got a different perspective that helped me tremendously. And there's diversified network what they really, really did it for me. And then the last one that we just talked about, seek counsel. I mean, now I don't do anything unless I reach out for a coach, whether it's a new skill that I want to acquire, whether it's a new level that I want to get into my business. I first look at who's doing it successfully, that has a track record of doing it. And then I go ask for help and say, can you help me? Sometimes I get some no's. No, I don't have time. I don't have that. But then I keep trying until I get a yes. Yes, I can get help from that person.
And what people don't understand about that third principle is, and once I say this, everyone will see this over and over again. People who are successful, they don't go and say, "Hey, I want your advice on something," because they don't have someone who's not used to seeking counsel. They think that if someone tells them to do something, they have some obligation to do something with it, right? Yes, no, go through the process, right? People who are successful, they'll say, "Hey, Manny, what do you think about that? That's kind of interesting." And then you say whatever. They have no obligation. They don't sense any obligation to do anything with it, right? So they might ask you, they might ask me, they might ask five or six people, and then they'll do something that's really successful. And people think, "Oh, well, they who told them to do that?" And they literally don't know. If you were to, it's not because they don't want to give people advice. They literally do not know exactly where they got the advice because they asked five or six people and then they did some variation of it. Right? Do you see
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah. Absolutely. And as coaches, that's the challenge that we always face, These are our opinions based on what I see other people do, based on my own experience most of the time. But this is your business. And at the end of the day, you have to make the decision according to your values, to your gut sometimes, and don't listen to everything I have to say. Validate it with somebody else if you need to. A lot
Absolutely.
of times, the spouses are great coaches too. Talk to your spouse because in my case, my spouse sometimes knows better than any other coach or any other advisor that I get because she feels she knows me and she understands where I come from, and that's the best advisor you can get, the people that are close to you. But like you said, you gotta have different dimensions. Sometimes people that don't know anything about your business are great advisors because they see things differently that people that are in your industry will never see because they are too into that industry and the way things have always been, and they don't think outside the box. And that's what I love about entry level positions because I always talk to them, I always get their advice, and a lot of the great things I did in my business came from people that I thought they could never give me advice. And I was like, man, it's just because they saw it somewhere else, I was able to apply it to my business and it worked beautifully. So,
And even if
yeah,
you didn't apply it exactly like they said, it was some variation of what they said or the
absolutely.
combination of a couple places. So I mean,
Well, at least it got you curious about going and find out more. And
that's
now
right.
I have to read 3, 4 books about that, right? Or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
it's awesome. Okay, so then what do you see the biggest opportunity? We have 10 minutes or so to kind of finish on this. I want to kind of finish on a really high note. So as a small business owner, and when you look at technology, because that's kind of one of your fortes and backgrounds, what do you see these small businesses when you kind of fast forward 3 to 5 years out? What do you see their biggest opportunities are?
A lot of times business owners are very slow to adapt new technologies. I saw it. I have in hospitality. I started 23 years ago. And 23 years ago, the POS systems were getting traction, but not everybody was still doing the little manual things, right? The little tickets and all that. And to me, that was the first thing that I did as a newcomer into the industry. You gotta do that because it makes the operation so efficient. So it only took me like 3 months to be in the industry to adopt the POS. I don't care how much it cost and all
What's a
that. And
POS?
then I thought it's a
Define.
point of sale, the point of
Okay, got
sale
it.
system. Yeah, which is the
Little thing
computer
where
how
they
you take
hand it to me and sign it off. And okay,
right, rather than having the server writing down, what you want and then give it to the kitchen and then they have to read the handwriting, right? The POS automatically puts it through the kitchen, prints it beautiful, no mistakes and all that.
times
That's what I'm
it,
talking.
puts it everything in there.
Exactly. There's so many benefits. So I adopted it 3 months getting into the industry, and they were fairly new. And I really thought everybody else around me, all of the rest of the people in hospitality, restaurants and hotels, they were going to be right behind me, like 3 months. It was surprising to me that 10 years later, there were still a lot of restaurants doing the manual thing. They had not adopted the technology. And that was back then. Now we're being forced to adopt technology, but we still see the fear in business owners that they don't want to learn about AI. They don't want to use it. They think it's a fad that is going to go away. They think it's going to replace jobs. No, they don't. they don't dive into the benefits of that and learning and trying it and failing of it. That is puts them in a disadvantage. So that's technology. That's what I see the biggest opportunity. Just stop being fearful about it and dive into it as quickly as you can because things are happening whether you like it or not, you know?
And I want to kind of hit on this before we kind of shift, but what people don't grasp as someone who bumps into these small businesses and someone who grew up at Schwab where technology was like, I mean, like I was at the front edge of the technology thing. And what'll happen is when I'm talking to people is they'll say they're using AI, right? Or they're back in the day it was they're using the web or I'm using technology. But they're just lying to themselves. Okay. They're not. Okay. They're using it to spell check. They're using it for, some silly document that they didn't want to write, right? AI is to learn and use AI. That is a very, very long and arduous process that takes hours and hours and hours. So you need to pick a project that you're going to use AI on and learn from that project and understand that it's going to be a process, right? So like answering the phone is a good example, right? So have AI answer your phone. Someone will say, no, 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 I want a live person to answer my phone. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Then have AI answer the phone during lunch hour or have AI answer the phone after hours and then have every employee call in. You're not going to get that answering the phone the first time good, right? It's going to take you 3 or 4 months until every employee, so they're all on board, call in and leave a message. And then during our meeting, I want feedback on how's that AI going. And over time, that AI can actually answer your phone all day, really. But that's not day one. That's maybe 6 months later. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, but that's what we're talking about having a fear, right? I'll start with the
Yes.
thing that I think is easier. I'll say go all the way around and do the thing that is the hardest thing for you, and
Okay.
try to, that's the project that you should pick. So in my world, taking inventory, it's a very
Yes.
tedious process that it has to be done weekly, and there's too many moving parts. And that's what I did. This is a
That's
problem
great.
all the time with a lot of the hospitality. The inventory takes too much time, or they have these great systems that cost a lot of money. That's another thing. Either it's hard to do or it costs too much. That's what the project that should do. So now with AI, it's allowed to, you can dump a bunch of information of this inventory and automatically sorts it out and spills it out the way you want it. So it has reduced the amount of time that you spend on the inventory tremendously. And before we couldn't do that. And that's when oh my God, I was not fearful. So I tackled this project that it was hard. Yeah, it was messy. I didn't do it right the first time, but I figured it out. And now I can save so much time and so much money because now I have AI do it for you.
That is
So
such
those
a
are,
great advice. And there's no personal information in the inventory. Who cares, right? So like
right.
everyone's like, I can't share that information. I don't want them to have my numbers. Inventories, who cares?
Who
That's a
cares? It's
great
just a bunch of
advice.
random things. Right. Of course, you're not going to put your personal
Yeah,
finances in there, right?
exactly.
Exactly. But there's a lot of hard things that you do on a daily basis that you just used to doing, but doing the hard way, and you don't think, how can I make that more efficient? And I do that because I know my way of thinking is efficiency systematic, but I find that I'm a rare person. Only 3% of the population thinks that way. You probably think that way too. But a lot of the business owners, they just want to serve their customer. They want to provide for their families, and they don't stop and do it themselves, which is okay. It doesn't mean it's just not their nature.
Right.
But get with somebody that is their nature so they can help you see these things that you can do better, right?
And then do you help them as an executive coach or business coach in kind of what projects they might start with? Like to your point, like I would start with the simplest, you would start with the hardest, but they need to kind of come up with some strategy to really adopt it because right now they're not.
Exactly. And you don't want to cover all because it could be overwhelming. You just say, I'm going to make every aspect of my business efficient from the get-go. You end up being overwhelmed and then you drop the project and then you end up doing nothing. So what I always tell them is, what are your biggest expenses and the biggest opportunity for you to save money? Those are the ones that we're going to tackle because that 20% is going to create 80% of the results. So rather than trying to make 100% of your processes efficient, they just concentrate on the 20% that are going to be the biggest impact in your business. And then they're really happy because very little work produce a lot of great results.
And then how many of your businesses use like Upworks as an example or Fiverr? Because I find that almost invaluable as a small business owner because I can go find incredible expertise for a reasonable price without risking a lot, right? So if they can overpromise and then I can just back away from it. How many of them are really good at leveraging a technology or a use like that? Because I see that as both technology and people.
Yes, well, technology allows you to outsource a lot more nowadays, right?
Yes.
As technology gets better, you get to rely less on the person, but and more on the system that they're using. Even accounting, for example,
And
you know,
expertise, right? I mean, so we can go
right.
find someone who's like insanely an expert in one thing.
Yeah, yeah, and you're tapping all over the world. You don't have to stay to your geographical location, right? That could be limited. Now you
Right.
can. We find more and more business owners. They have teams now, Philippines, Central America, and they have diverse teams, but they're experts in what they do, and it works great. I mean, you just have to manage your business accordingly and plan for it, and you know that it's a remote team. But I mean, I'm all for it. I always suggest it if it can be done. Some of the businesses you do need the local,
Right.
interaction, like, depending on what your business is about and how you make money. But for most of them, it's doable completely.
And that's where you come in, right? That you sit down with them, get to understand the business, and then say, well, this could be something that you could use Upwork, an expert on Upworks for, or no, this needs to be local, right? I mean, then you can kind of
Yeah,
have that conversation and give them some
absolutely. And
guidance.
before we do that, we dabble into, we'll help them understand who they are as leaders. Because a lot of times, this is the hard part of my job is I have to tell them in a nice way that the bottleneck of the business is themselves. And is not an easy way to tell them, but and this probably has happened. You've seen it all the time. The business tops according to the ability and the skill of the business owner. And it gets to a point that it served them well and they grew the business small to a certain level. And now it cannot grow anymore because now they are the problem. They haven't grown in their skills. They haven't grown in their leadership skills, most importantly. So we have to tell them, this is who you are. This is what you're about. This no longer serves you. Now you have to build a team that helps you close those gaps that you don't have and become more efficient. So it's a hard pill to swallow at first, but once they understand it, they're like, okay, I get it. This is what is gonna let me, let control off, rely more on my team, train them better, create systems around it. That's how I can grow it rather than just keep working harder and harder to make it grow.
And what point in the engagement does that happen? Does that happen like in the first 10 hours, the first five? I mean, because you obviously have to kind of learn what's the business and where the bumps are, but how fast does that conversation have if they engage you?
We want to do it as quickly as possible because
Okay,
otherwise we're lying to them, right? We can
exactly.
pretend it's the numbers, we can pretend it's the other. I mean, you gotta get to the bottom of the problem right away. The good thing about it is that it's not me telling them that, I'm part of a bigger network of coaches. It's called System and Soul, where it's a framework. And now frameworks are very popular that you get to tell the business owner it's not really you, but you're not using a framework. And once they adopt this framework, then everybody aligns around the framework, and it becomes very obvious that they have a job to do, and it was not the job that they thought they needed to do. And then that's how a way of nicely tell them, stop doing what you were doing and now align to the new way of doing things. And they usually goes smoother. So we introduced the framework on day one.
I got it.
And yeah, on day one, we introduced the framework right away.
Well, good. So we're coming up here on the end. First of all, I want to thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everyone else has too, as well as kind of the importance. The challenges is just being honest with ourselves and kind of here's where we are and where we get clear on where we want to go. But the opportunities are endless, right? I mean, like I wish I was 20 years younger. I just think there's just so much opportunity out there. If someone will kind of slow down and take a look at some of the opportunities that exist, leveraging technology, AI to become more efficient and, you know,
Yep.
it's just going to be funner as heck in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be a blast. But I want to close with I learned that every problem in a business it turns out to be a leadership problem at the end. Sometimes it's not that obvious, but if you don't know something, that means you don't have the knowledge or you don't have the skill for something. And then financially is the same. You get in trouble financially if you don't have the financial skills or if you don't have knowledge on how to do it properly. Then everything that you don't have enough knowledge or you don't have the skills is going to become a big problem for you. So the sooner you work on your skill or you get somebody to help you get the knowledge, the better off you're going to be as a business owner. So be proactive rather than be reactive.
And I can tell you, as someone who's invested in companies my whole life, been on hundreds and hundreds of financial calls, the leader, they all sound good because they're professionals, right? They're skilled, they have a good message, they have a good process. But I can't tell you how many times once I'm invested in a company, I just have to wait, and I even quit getting on the conference calls. I don't necessarily sell the company because it's a good company. I'll use Intel as a perfect example. I bought Intel early on, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and they just had terrible leadership. And I just quit getting on the conference calls. I'm like, you guys just suck so bad. I'm just done. Okay. But it's a good company. I'll just hold on to the company. Right. Well, the minute they changed out leadership, that stock's up fivefold. Okay,
Mm,
literally fivefold, and they
yeah,
did it in less than a year, and it becomes, and everyone's like the old leaders like we can't do this, we can't do that, but they actually can if they get a plan, they go in
yep,
and execute, and they're clear on where they're going. The companies will turn around. Microsoft did the same thing. The minute Bauer stepped out, and they hired the new CEO, boom, went through the roof. It's over and over again. When you look at these companies that have good brands, good businesses, the companies do nothing until all of a sudden in comes a new leader, starts making some adjustments, boom, company goes through the roof.
absolutely. Yeah, they know what moves the needle, and what moves the needle is leadership.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, it's huge. So how do people get a hold of you? So do kind of a quick overview so that people can reach out and
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is myripplecoach.com, and that's where we have all our information. You can check out what we're about, testimonials, everything that we have in there. And of course, we're in social media and all the platforms, but our website probably would be the most useful for people to check us out and reach out if you need help with their teams, their own leadership, their systems, implementation of systems or engineering, we call it their culture, their the soul of the business. We help with all of that.
and I'm sure you have a consultation, like a half hour, they can call you and at least just kind of tell you what they're thinking, and then you can give them some suggestions on where you might be a fit or not a fit, right?
Better than that, we do a 90-minute strategy call with their team because we want to get their team involved from day one too. So we do a free 90-minute strategy call where we walk them through a process where they realize where are they aligned and where do they need to work on to be aligned. And it's usually an aha moment where like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're operating like this, or these are the things that we're doing right, but these are things that we need improvement. So it becomes very obvious, not only for the owner, but for the whole leadership team to act on that. So,
Man, that is valuable. 90 minute, even if they don't
yep.
hire. And that's one of those where you might not hire you out of the gate, but they'll come back a month later, 2 months later.
Yeah,
Take
we
them a
always
little
provide
time to
value. They walk out with a 90 minutes with a 90-day strategy out of those 90 minutes and they can implement themselves. And we find that some people do and a lot of people don't because again, they don't know how to do it or they don't have the right advice on how to do it. So that's where we come in and we close that gap. But a lot of people
Wow.
do. Very
Yeah,
valuable.
no, huge. That sounds very valuable. All right. Well, thank you so much, Manny. I really appreciate it. Hope everyone's enjoyed the call today. Reach out to Manny and take him up on that 90-minute call.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Appreciate the invite. Enjoy it.